So I have to admit, it was always pretty likely that we'd join in the fun that is the Taylor Swift bandwagon. So here we are talking about what it takes to create raving fans of your brand. No, there won't be choreographed dance or outfit changes, but what I can promise you is a whole lot of talk about brand and, of course, America's sweetheart. The power of brand and story together are one of the greatest multipliers in any business success. We have to break it down into a way in which many people can action on. Today we're going to do that through Taylor Swift's record. We're going to get to that. But first and foremost, I want to introduce this lovely guest of ours who goes by the name of Sue Woodard. Sue, we have this wonderful history together. You have a storied past, one of which has been focused on a lot of customer centricity, which we're going to talk a lot about today. Welcome to On the Record. How are you?
I am so good. Thank you for having me. This is amazing.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Michael and I are going to throw you a lot of tough questions, as we often do. We're going to grill you. We're going to see how you handle the conversation. First and foremost, though, we do want to draw some parallels to the record again today. We're going to look at Taylor Swift, so all the Swifties can get excited. We're going to give you your moment, as if you haven't had it already this year or past few years. We're going to look at Taylor's version of Red and draw its parallels to what brand and storytelling can mean for a business.
Now I'm lying on the cold hard ground. Trouble. Then I was too late, and I bet you think about me. 'Cause all I know is we said hello, and your eyes are looking like coming home.
So, Michael, could you draw a couple lines between these two conversation points?
Yeah, I actually think Taylor's version is a big part of this story, not just for this record, but for Taylor Swift as a whole. Yeah. I am not a Swiftie. I have barely listened to her music outside of what you hear on the radio or food shopping. But I do know her story, and that is an incredibly powerful technique and tool that they've used, maybe on purpose. Maybe it was organic, but we've heard the story of her fighting her label, coming out of this, re-recording all of her music so that she can get what she feels she's due in terms of the royalties of it. And that, I think, is an incredible brand piece, intentional or unintentional, that is unique to her story in a very big way.
Yeah.
I agree. I am also admittedly not a Swiftie. I did wear red lipstick today, just as a nod, But I agree. I remember hearing that story, and that really captured a lot of people's attention.
Yeah.
But I also think she's very well known for being a storyteller, right? Her albums are constantly. In fact, I think Red is a breakup album. Jake Gyllenhaal, if I remember correctly. But it's very fascinating to me, just the way she's able to spin a story. I think about her presence over the last couple of years, that a lot of the frankly, a lot of the attention was around her love story with Kelsey and, where was she going to be at the game and all of these, what's happening at her concerts. There was a lot of stories woven into that. So not only does her music tell a story, but I think she's got interesting stories that have really helped build this phenomenal brand that is T-Swizzle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, she's one of the biggest brands in the world. We can't deny it. I mean, Apple, T-Swift, comparable brands as far as they're present, which is preposterous to say, but is a reality within this time.
Right.
What I give her credit for her and her team is how tightly they've curated what we see of Taylor when we see Taylor and how she shows up as well. I think a great brand, a great story is often a byproduct of heavily curated thought, right? It's what's on the editing room floor that's as impactful as the stuff that we actually consume. Everything that she does is obviously with great intent, and I think that it just has given her fan base such a connected experience, one of which is still, although manufactured, quite authentic as well. And you can see how diehard her fans are, whether it's her music, her concerts, or her garb, if you will. It's working, and it's really working well. So
right on.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about it before we get into, taking people into the brand evangelism sector, the music itself, how it powered her brand. So, Michael, although an admitted non-Swiftie, what did you like, or maybe what didn't you like about the record?
I can appreciate the polish. I can appreciate the storytelling. And I think there's a lot of that in here. It sounds like her through many different genres. I think for me, it's really, I mean, there's what, 30 tracks
There
on
are 30
here?
tracks.
And so
It's a lot of stories.
it's a lot of
Yeah,
stories.
yeah.
I think it probably could benefit from being a little bit more condensed, but who am I, right? I mean, it's obviously worked well for her.
It certainly has. Sue?
I just want to know what Jake Gyllenhaal did to her that caused like a 30,
go well.
30 track, album. But you mentioned the genres, and that's
Yeah.
the piece that I think really strikes me about the album. Is I think more than any other album, this one uses so many different genres. There's so many different ways that you hear her, and I think it's very much like stories that a business will use in the telling their story. There's employee stories, there's founder stories, there's history stories, there's customer stories, of course, success stories, failure stories. I mean, there's so many different kinds of things you can do, but it still is bringing through the story of your brand, and that's, I think, just something so brilliant in this particular album.
Yeah, I love it. We've talked about some records today that are extremely cohesive. I'm not going to give this record for being strongly cohesive. How could you be? 30 songs is, what I think she credited was a bit of a playground. Any genre was within reach, any kind of maybe songwriting collaboration was within reach, and I think that's fun. And it gave her fan base a lot of different things that they could connect to. I originally started this conversation with tight curation. Well, this is the removal of tightly curation. It's like, hey, you want to do a pop song or, with electronic edge? Like, for instance, everything that has changed has this unusual dubstep drop. Like, I don't think we needed to go there, but she felt she had the space to do so. She got to experiment, and that's kind of fun, and I appreciate her for that. What I did really find in here was some real intimate moments with Taylor and her voice that give her credit for being as talented as she's proclaimed to be. I think her brand sometimes supersedes her talent. I might suggest there are moments where you see, holy cow, this gal does have it though. She is a pure voice, a pure player at heart, and it does transcend time. And I give her credit for it in a day and age where synthesizers and other things have consumed the use attention when it comes to music. She's giving guitar music a legitimate chance to live on for years to come. Because of her work with the guitar on this record and many others, we're gonna see a lot of young pop stars that follow her pathway. In 2020, 2050, there are gonna be people that are representative of these records that have taken place. So shout out to Taylor for inspiring a generation to pick up an instrument that was starting to maybe lose its appeal, but it's always been the backbone of music since really the dawn of time. So I love her for that and that reason mainly only. But the record's prolific. You talked about polish. She is the most well-resourced artist in the world, no question. It shows up in the way of which the mixing, mastering, and the recording process is second to none. And it takes a mediocre song and makes it that much better, so someone might not understand why they like it. The fidelity is so perfect. The decision-making with some of the arrangements is just second to none. So yes, do the resources unlock that? But to her credit, she's putting them on display, and the masses are consuming them. So shout out to her and her team behind the scenes as well. So
I will tell you an interesting story about Taylor Swift. Is I actually had an Uber driver one day who that was his former job, as he was in the Caravan driving a truck for Taylor on one of her, not on this particular last tour, and he did talk about just an unbelievable team, exactly as you said, and just the support that she had, but also what a genuinely good person she is. I mean, sometimes it ruins the music or the show when you hear that person's actually like a jerk behind the scenes, and you're like, and they're singing these beautiful things. But I loved that story because it's like there's so much of her just out there, and it was kind of cool to hear, oh, she's actually a soulful, kind, good, I'm sure she's not a perfect person. Or so says Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah,
I don't know, but
Clearly not.
I'm just saying. But I thought it was interesting to hear that perspective as well from somebody who had been a part of that team and part of her story.
Well, I'm feeling poorly for that Uber driver because he was not on this last tour. Is that correct?
Correct. I know.
Did you read the headline?
Yes, he
oh
brought
my
that
goodness.
up.
So Taylor, $197 million was reallocated to the people that brought her recent tour to
Equipment.
life. That's a substantial sum of money. I don't care how many people were included in this process.
Yeah.
That poor gentleman.
I gave him an extra big tip.
Thank you.
But I'm just saying,
But incredible. Again, part of her brand, and we're going to start to now get into this conversation, is that giving back. She's relatable. She's kind of America's sweetheart. I mean, many people have been coining that throughout the years. She is that right now, and she's earned the title. I mean, so shout out to you, Taylor. You did it right, and it seems like it's going to continue to perpetuate well into the future. So, all right. Taylor, Swifties, you've been satiated with our feedback. We want to talk about creating brand evangelism.
Yeah.
So you've did it through a lot of strong emotional connections in your career. Relationships are like the building blocks of how you've built your career. Can you take us through how the power of brand and storytelling is often started with emotions and connectivity?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting when you look at, I mean, humans have been telling stories since the beginning of time. I mean, this is the way that, the cavemen told each other, like, don't go over there because there's a woolly mammoth. And, people have been telling stories. There's parables in the Bible. I mean, there's all of these different ways that this is the way that humans connect with other humans. And you tend to remember, if I asked you, what were you doing last Wednesday morning? You might not remember that. But if I said, do you remember the day you got married, your child was born, somebody special to you died, you remember those things because there's emotion connected with them. So I love that you bring up emotion out of the gates because your brain actually does something different on stories. It has this wonderful little cocktail of serotonin and oxytocin and all these different chemicals that cause you to remember more, recall more, to have a fonder feeling towards the person or business that you're talking to. So emotion is just a huge part of it, and I think there's just no better way to do that for a brand is to find all of the stories, and there's so many of them. Find those stories and then find the ways to tell them.
Yeah. I want to ask you a hard-hitting question because you and I are going through a rebrand right now on Leadpages, and it's really exciting, but we have to ask ourselves a very difficult question. What's the right emotion that we latch on to, right?
Yeah.
There's a large array, but which is the right one, and how do you go about that decision-making process, I guess?
Yeah, well, I would actually ask you, how do you, right? Because I think we're in the middle of it, right? we can barely see the end result, and we're kind of like feeling around it. It feels like we're in a dark room. We're trying to figure out where do we stand? But I don't think we have the answer yet, which is it's an interesting place to be. What should we be looking for?
Well, I would tell you actually, you made some interesting points earlier talking about curation, and how do you, what do you keep and what do you, leave on the cutting room floor. But I think you start really wide because you've got so many stories in your business. Everybody does. Every brand has all these amazing stories. Not every single one is one you always want to tell. But when you think about the stories of your customers, I mean, the story that the human brain loves the most and is most attracted to is the hero's journey. This is what happened, ran into these challenges, and then, I mean, it's the basic storyline of every great movie, book, et cetera, right? And so think about, a founder's story, the history of the company, challenges that you ran into along the way, and how do you, how were they overcome? Some amazing, customer stories are my favorites, I think, and you and I raised up a lot of those stories in working together, but finding the ways that your customers can tell stories instead of you telling stories about yourself, right? It's so powerful. Your employee stories, how did somebody come find your company and what did it mean to them? How did they go help a customer and do something that changed their life? I mean, these are the stories that I would encourage you to go broad, collect the stories. I think sometimes people overcomplicate it and make it too hard, too complicated, too big of a project. I think you just start collecting and gathering all of these stories, not over-processing it and over-producing it, but gather all the stories, and then you really start to kind of find these narratives that weave through of, man, these are the stories that really are going to resonate with our own employees. Your own employees are part of your brand evangelists, brand ambassadors. It's how you help recruit people in and retain them. With your customers, it's how they will drive revenue, get retention, referrals. It just has so much power, and it's so cost effective, right? I mean, that's the other thing that I love about it is it doesn't, you don't have to have a huge spend to collect the true stories that are already laying there littered about your business. And so I'd encourage you, go wide and gather as many stories as you can, and then curate from there.
All right, I like that. I mean, Michael, we talk about a lot of product. We're a product-first organization. The technological parity that exists in 2025 and beyond, the playing field is a bit leveled. So the power of brand, the power of story now becomes that competitive differentiator. Your feels on it, things you could harken back to in the past that are now relevant today, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're trying to lean into it. I think we're trying to find our footing again. I think we had a story, which was we're for solopreneurs. We're for the small business. But we realized our product wasn't actually aligned with that story in a meaningful way. And so there was actually a lot of conflict in that relationship. And so we're trying to find, well, we do have a customer base that we're well aligned with, but we haven't been speaking to them much. And I think what we're in the process of doing is finding those new stories, some of those old stories from when we started and we were aligned with them, and bringing them back and resurfacing them. So we're in an interesting time, and maybe by the next season we'll actually have some answers. But what are some brands that we should be looking at? Like, what are some of those stories that you've seen where you're like, yeah, they really nailed it?
Well, when you think about the brands that you love that create great customer experiences, it's interesting that I almost always can think of, oh, like there's a cool story that I know about them. So I think about Chewy is a brand that people love, right? And one of the stories that probably a lot of people know about Chewy is they're unbelievable with, if you have a pet that passes away and you've got something you need to, return, they will send you flowers and a sympathy card, and they'll accept back anything, and they donate it. And I just go, that's a cool story, about that business. And you hear and see people telling stories, for example, about Chewy. Just the other day, I spend a lot of time on Delta because I travel a lot, and you're forced to sit and watch the screen and all the things, But I remember they had this one little thing where they were telling, it's kind of a story of this person who wanted to make their next level of status, and they went on to a remote relative's wedding, somewhere overseas, so that they could make status. And it was kind of like the story of this, person going to this wedding, and here she is dancing, and she made her status. And I remember, I see a lot of Delta stuff, but that one jumped out at me because I was like, I've been there trying to make my next status, and I liked just the little story that it wove with that. It was much more compelling to me than we are Delta and we're cool, So I think it's interesting, as you are going through this journey, as many of your customers and clients are going through this journey, it's looking at the brands that you maybe admire and what kind of stories are they telling. But again, you'll find that the stories are there. They're there. It's just a matter of, it's not creating them, it's finding them, right? Because they're there.
Yeah.
I think, when we look at the record, or maybe just T-Swift as a whole, you mentioned how getting your customers to tell your stories, and that's something that we see a lot, whether it's purposeful or not. I did a deep dive on TikTok of just Taylor Swift content. She was just in Vancouver, so there's a ton of.
Are you sure you're not a Swiftie?
I had to do my research.
You sound a little Swiftie-ish right now.
But some of the stories are like dissecting her facial expressions as she's walking, right?
Wow.
They get really deep. Now, those aren't controlled by her camp necessarily, right? As a brand, how much risk do you take on when you're doing that? And are there brands that you've seen control that narrative really well?
That's an interesting point because she's larger than life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
Clearly.
the world is going to be talking about her, and I think there's very little you can do to probably control and curate some of that.
Absolutely.
I think most of us are don't suffer from that same problem, and so we can be a little bit more careful around it. But I think in many cases, your customers generally are very excited to tell a story if they are only asked, right? Because there are great stories that they have. And frankly, the thing I've always loved about raising up customer stories is it's not, me talking about, aren't we cool in our business, or you talking about your business. It's you've got the customer, or you're talking about the customer and the cool thing that happened, and it kind of puts it over here. Everybody's the hero of their own story, right? And very often as a business, we make ourselves, we are the hero. This is what we do.
Right.
Instead of saying, the customer is actually, they're the hero of the story, but what did we do to help them on their journey? Or how did we, turn something around? How did we save the day? How did we drive ROI? What did we do with that customer? And if you can't get the customer to get on camera, not everybody, will do that. You telling that story, if you have their permission, using their brand and their name and all that is super powerful. If you don't have permission for whatever reason, sometimes people are private about that stuff, you tell the story and just say, you don't have to say who it is. Yep. But I think, telling those stories, it raises up the customer as the hero, but it brings you along, the way for that journey. So I would say I don't know how much you can, control what other people are going to say out there. I mean, that's kind of the blessing and the curse of social media, right? Is that people are going to say what they're going to say, but you raise up a lot of goodwill when you, using social media as an example, telling those stories on social media, other people seeing them. I remember we used to have people call and say, I don't even know what y'all do there, but I want to find out because all these people seem to really love you and you're always talking about your customers, right?
Yeah.
Best lead generation engine in the world, by the way, if you can get that one humming along.
Yes,
so, yeah.
So, I mean, and sometimes we would just we'd have celebrate the customer day and we'd get we got the old cheerleading letters that we just spell out the customer's name and get a bunch of people to do a thing. And we're just so excited to have them as a customer. Or we would, another cool thing you could do is even just have alerts for whoever your great customers are or whatever, if you set a news alert about those, key customers or key relationships and you find those things and you celebrate them online on their behalf, man, that's the way you're going to win, such huge loyalty from these customers in these industries is by paying attention, raising up their stories, and then repeating them, right?
Well, we used to use the function of public relations to do so. We would actually find these superstars within these organizations that are winning, and we would actually submit them without them having to do much work for these awards and these opportunities. And imagine that moment when they found out the company that you've been working alongside with has just positioned you for a placement you never would have anticipated.
Totally.
I mean, imagine how that customer conversation comes up on contract renewal, or if there's any friction in the relationship, they're going to harken back to that. But man, look what they did for me in that moment when I asked for nothing.
Right.
I mean, so if you can get these things going in your favor, you can see it's this perpetual motion of good, and everybody wants it. So we're going to continue to try and unpack that. So we spent a lot of time talking about the outcome, that brand evangelist, but it all starts with some early interactions, right? This kind of topic for us today was from leads to brand evangelists. So I'd love to hear from your vantage point. What do you do early to start to cultivate the relationship that gets to this person who's shouting from the mountaintops about how great you are?
Well, I do think in many cases it is starting with why are they coming to your business? What problem are they looking to have solved? And I always like to kind of tee up very early on in a relationship is we want to be able to tell your story. We love hearing your successes. That's what we're here for, is to be able to raise these things up. So I think you plant those seeds very early on and supplement those early interactions where they're seeing somebody else's story that they relate to. You brought up something really interesting talking about the kinds of customers maybe you've worked with in the past and maybe different customer bases that you're moving to. I think it's a really fascinating point to think about people being able to see themselves and relate to the stories that you're telling, right? And so I think that's a good, and it doesn't mean you have to, every business is a little different with how niche you want to be. We just work with these people, or we work with all kinds of people. But people want to see themselves in the stories that you're telling. And so I think if you think this is the kind of people we want to attract and connect with, how do you tell a story from your point of view, from a customer's point of view, from an employee's point of view, that's going to resonate with those folks and bring them along in that journey, because they're going to say, I want to be part of that story too.
Yeah. I mean, and think about Taylor's vulnerability that she opened up. Everybody's been through heartbreak. Everybody's been through a tough breakup. She's had to do so in the public eye. But I mean, that was probably one of her kind of inlets to the connected experience that started from an early T-Swiftie into one of which is now going to follow her until she stops playing music altogether. So I think there's different pathways to how that connected experience happens. And for her, it was, I'm going to show you who I am. And I think a lot of people have found that to be very relatable because we're humans and we have these emotions as she's sharing with us. So, Michael, I want to talk through just a product experience a little bit as well. There are early moments when someone buys new technology. There's these moments of excitement and delight. How are we paying those off, and how do you think they are best paid off to create that brand evangelism that we're seeking?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the old metric of time to value. I think we look at kind of aha moments in a product journey. How do we get those early on? What is the like you mentioned the Chewy, right? That's obviously at the end of the cycle. What is that same emotion that we can elicit on that first experience as well? And we look at companies like Zappos, right, where something goes wrong and they just send you a new pair of shoes. You can return it as many times as you want, right? They've removed all of that friction, and it's such a delight as a customer when you realize, oh, I'm just gonna get what I want from this company, whatever I need, and that creates that loyalty. So I think it's trying to find that moment really early on in the life cycle that creates that extra delight. The product is, the expectation is gonna solve the problem they hired you to solve. Great, but what is that extra piece, that kind of delight, And how early in the customer journey can we create it? I don't think we always do, but I think the goal is, how do we get there in day 1, in day 2, on day 7, whatever it would be.
I love that you're talking about the customer journey, because it's another one of my very favorite topics to talk
It
about,
is, yes.
as the customer journey. But I think, you're onto something so fascinating, because I do think that service in general and our feeling of, it's hard to go somewhere and feel delighted anymore. I mean, service has just kind of gone downhill, right? But there are a lot of places that it even can be, it doesn't have to be always a human doing it, but imagine, celebrating when somebody comes on board. I think that's something that, in our past, we've done really successfully. Somebody comes on board and it's like, yay, welcome, you're part of the family. And even sometimes, I've done things online, where based on the time of year, done a little shopping of late online. And sometimes when you just get something and it's like a, woohoo, we're so excited that you're, now part of our, and I was like, wow, I just bought some lotion, that's cool. But,
right.
but I think people are hungry for, for many reasons, whether it's, the digital world, social media, pandemic, everything else. People are very disconnected and they want to feel part of something. Certainly. They want to feel like, oh, you're part of us now. Yep. And that's something that I think any business can very early on make people feel embraced and excited that they've become like a part of you. And it is a place where a lot of businesses fail. Like, it's right when somebody has said, I do, and stepped away from the altar in terms of signing up, that it's like, now I haven't heard anything, and now like, what's going on? And so it's a place that it's really important very early on to embrace them. And again, it doesn't have to be always very human. We always want to utilize technology in smart ways, right? But it's such a great way. A video. I'm a huge fan of using video, of course, as you know.
Great medium.
And I think even sending a video, from you being like, man, we're so glad that you're part of our business. Any business can do that. It's inexpensive to do things like this. BombBomb's a great solution that's out there. You can use that and fire a video out there. Everybody's got video capability. We're all more used to seeing ourselves on video, so you can't be as shy as you used to be. But something like that early on brings them along and makes them feel like, wow, I'm part of something and I feel connected to something. So I just think early in the customer journey, grabbing those opportunities and making them feel welcome and a part of something.
Yeah, you get one chance to make a first impression, right? After that, it's gone. And it's often that, that old thing we used to adhere to, every touch point either builds trust or erodes trust.
Yes.
And it's that first impression maybe has the most momentous one. So whether that's in-app and there's some UX moment where we show a little bit of delight. You published your first page. Holy cow, congratulations. There's different ways of engaging with that.
Yes.
But it's those that forget to do those things that kind of lose out. And as time goes on and it's an us versus them consideration, you start to lose that battle in favor of someone who is making those early experiences very positive and very memorable. We're talking about brand, we're talking about storytelling. It's the memorability that's our greatest advantage and outcome of this all. So I think those that are doing it well, it's easy to say, wow, I wish I could do more of that. Some of the stuff you said, Sue, it's not as difficult as we perceive it to be. And even in product, we can create these moments of delight earlier, but we tend to sometimes forget about those because it's easier to chase a sexier initiative.
We go on to the next feature.
It's exactly it.
Right? And sometimes we forget about the customer's emotion as they're using our product. We satisfy the need. And sometimes we stop there. And I think what we see is the artists that go that extra mile are some of the ones that we talk about on the show. Obviously, Taylor Swift has done an incredible job of that. But that is really the difference. We can all solve the problem, but who's actually going to elicit the emotion?
You said something very interesting there, because you were talking about, kind of remembering, kind of making that connection. It's very interesting because there was a study I read recently where it said 68% of people will remember a story, 5% of people will remember a stat. And so I'm glad I told a few stories, because you're definitely not going to remember that stat. But I think it's interesting. It's because of that, emotional connection. And again, you can use technology to help you tell those stories as you go, but it is the repetition. Very often, I think, it's an interesting thing you're talking about where you kind of, okay, they're on board and we're going to go off and build the next feature set because that's what they probably want. And, here's this person. And sometimes it's the repetition and it's finding that right balance. You never want to overwhelm someone with too many communications, but it's capturing, these moments, those moments that matter to that customer, and then being there with some kind of a contact. And just continuing, to the repetition. They say in marketing, you have to say it 9 times before somebody actually even
that list
hears
is
it.
growing. I think it's up to 13 by the way.
Is it?
As a matter
Okay,
of fact.
probably
And
so,
it's
with all the digital distraction we have these days.
Yeah.
But if you think about that, we get sick of hearing our own story. We're like, oh, we already told that story so many times. And somebody has just started to hear it and go, connect with your brand and go, so don't stop telling those stories so soon. And I'll tell you it is another story that I'm going to tell you real quick.
Please, it's a story about stories.
But it's a story about stories. But everybody knows about Paul Revere, the Midnight Ride, right? So there was actually 2 other guys. Okay, and I saw this thing, it was in Harvard Business Review. They said the story of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere and 2 other guys. And there were 2 other guys that they actually had a very interesting part of that whole night and what happened, and really interesting. And there was one part of the story where one of the guys, it was William Dawes and Samuel Prescott are the other 2 guys. Just try to give them a little prop here, in their afterlife. But one of the guys had some, red coats following him, and he came up to a farmhouse and he shouted into the house and said, "Hey boys, I've got 2 of them," and making it sound like there's nobody in this house, but it chased off these guys. All these interesting things happened, right? The only reason that Paul Revere is the guy that we know is because he wrote down the story and he told the story. The other 2 did not. And so that's why we know his name. He's his own brand of being this, part of this big epic story of that time.
Yep.
Other 2 amazing guys were part of it, didn't tell their stories. And so it's capturing the story, telling it repeatedly. And now we know the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, and there was these 2 other guys. And we don't want to be the 2 other guys. We want to be the brand everybody remembers, right? So
I think you hit on a lot of things, is that we get so bored of our own story, but that's way before anyone else is bored of it. Marketers are the most notorious at this, and I've been guilty. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and I still struggle to regurgitate things that we've done. And maybe Michael said to remind me of recently, hey, go back to that though. That's really good. And a fraction of the people that we want to see it actually saw it.
Yes.
So we're changing our volume.
It's you creatives. That's the problem, right? It's like
Always
you're
want
on
the
to the
next
next
the next thing. And it's
Yeah.
we're doing ourselves a disservice.
And you know what? Greatest hits, you think about how often have people repeated, what's the big song from this one? I Knew Trouble. I knew you were trouble when you walked in.
Yeah, there's
How many times? I'm not even trying to listen to Taylor Swift, and I know every lyric to that song because it's been repeated how many times, right?
Yeah.
How many times has she had to play it live?
Oh, I can't
now.
even. I can't even. You do wonder, do they ever here we go again.
Story
Right?
is the storytelling of
repetition.
the medium.
I assure you, I did not work on learning the lyrics to that song. I know the lyrics to that song because it's been repeated, right? What if she got bored and was like, that's not a good one, let's move on to something else.
Yeah. We've learned much through Taylor, and we've learned much through today's discussion as well. Sue, are there any parting thoughts? You're on the road, you're delivering keynotes, anything that you can leave a bunch of people that are viewers and listeners of the show that are often marketers beyond what we've already stated today?
I think I would wrap a bow around this topic just because I think it's such an important one. That I would encourage people to stop, don't overwork it, and we got to put a project around this, and we need budget.
Yeah.
You really don't need that much to start capturing, uncovering those stories, start telling those stories. We've got, social media, we've got our websites, we've got Leadpages, we've got, we've got all the places that you can tell these stories. It's cost effective, it works. And I would just encourage people to not. I just feel like we have a tendency to, I gotta make a plan, I gotta make a project, gotta people together, just do it. Just get started on this because the results on this, they come quickly, they're meaningful. You adjust course as you go, but just uncover those stories and then empower your customers to also tell those stories. Empower your employees to also tell those stories. Encourage them to, right? Don't keep these things a secret, don't keep it just as something your marketing team does, but get everybody going. Get the employees from your stories from your employees, but just get started with it because it's such a powerful strategy. Don't over manipulate it, over process it, and then we're still talking about this in a year, and somebody's thinking,
Hopefully
I
not.
should have done that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
Well, if you hadn't won over Michael, you did just now, because we like to push process aside in the desire for test something, run it out there, don't be afraid,
Yes.
just go to market. You're telling us that this is a cost-effective way to test. Do you have something in hand that works? And if so, repeat, repeat, repeat.
Yes.
And if so, we can continue to invest accordingly around that. So,
Yeah.
Michael, parting thoughts from your behalf on just brand evangelism and just what it means to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we have a lot to take away from this episode.
We've learned. This is good. This is good for us.
So, you know, I hope others have as well. Obviously, the repetition is key. The customer story is really fascinating for me. Is how do we? I think we can do a better job.
We certainly can.
Elevating our own customer stories, and how do we find that kind of surprise and delight? And I don't know. I feel a little bit more inspired by Taylor Swift than I did at the beginning of this conversation. So I think it's a win-win-win.
We're like 1/3 T Swifty now, right? We came in 0 for 3. I think we're 1/3 T Swifty now. But that's the power of story and brand, unpacked by all. But Sue, thank you so much. You've given us
Thank
a
you
ton.
for having me.
The listeners and the viewers are going to be delighted to hear from your experiences, what they can apply, and how they can maybe reframe their thinking to move their business forward into 2025 and beyond.
I love it. And I'd love to connect, by the way, with the folks on your podcast. I'm on LinkedIn. That's my choice.
Find your girl.
My only social media channel that I use, but because I tend to do a lot of B2B, so I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn. But what an honor. I mean, I just have huge respect for you and what you're doing, and the rest of your crew that's over here. You've got
Behind the
amazing,
scenes.
I know,
Yeah.
amazing people. But thank you. This is, as I said, one of my favorite topics, and I was super glad to be here.
Thank you so much.
It's been our pleasure.
Yeah.